Welcome to Journey to the Sunnyside, the podcast where we have thoughtful conversations to explore the science of habits, uncover the secrets to mindful living, and of course, inspire your own mindful drinking journey. Today we are joined by Maggie Jenson, behavior change specialist and founder of Magnify Progressive Wellness. In this episode, she shares her deeply personal journey, growing up with an alcoholic mother, experiencing trauma, and how it shaped her relationship with alcohol. She opens up about the pivotal moments that led her to reframe her past, break free from generational patterns, and ultimately find purpose in helping others. This is a raw conversation about mindset shifts, overcoming regret, and how trauma can actually become a superpower. Maggie, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here. Sunnyside is one of my favorite platforms, and I love your podcast, so it's kind of surreal.
That's so awesome. I mean, obviously, that's going to be music to my ears, so thank you for saying that. And so today, we're going to get into some really specific things because you have a unique take on things. You have an approach around wellness, how it blends with fitness and mindset, and can help you for breaking habits around excessive drinking. But before we get into all of that, I want you to take us into your story about where you started and where you ended up with maybe alcohol, where it made you start to think about it and assess it. And then you came up with your own ideas on how to address it. And then I'd love to give you the stage a little bit to talk about what you do so that we can lead into this conversation around fitness and nutrition and mindset around alcohol.
Yeah, and when you even just ask me that, I get a smile on my face, even though to go back in time and tell the story is somewhat triggering. And I would say for listeners, we're going to be talking about the childhood of an alcoholic mother, suicide, and things like that. But over my experiences, especially the past 5 years, I've been able to come to terms with things and bring a smile to my own face for the gratitude of these lessons and these things that used to be so hurtful that led me to drinking. Now I'm at peace and I'm comfortable, and I actually really enjoy opening up and talking about these really low moments, because had it not been for these really low moments, I wouldn't have learned to challenge my perspective on quote unquote addiction, alcoholism, what we now call alcohol use disorder. I would have never had those experiences that felt wrong in order to look for the right.
So I love that point that you're making about how you're viewing something that could be potentially viewed as negative or regretful or whatever it is. It depends on how you frame it and what the circumstances are. But I think a lot of times I would find myself in regret, like, oh, I wish I would have done it this way, or I wish it hadn't happened that way. But then I realized you got to put it in the positive. Like, I wouldn't have all these understandings. I wouldn't be where I am. I wouldn't be going where I want to go if none of that happened. And it sounds like you're going to tell us a little bit of a story around that. And I just wanted to point out before we moved on, and maybe it didn't get addressed, and how important that mindset that you just said is.
Yeah. And I kind of realized it in a little bit of an epiphany moment of all of those times that I would say, I wish I could have done different. I would give anything to go back in time and change X, Y, and Z. I kept hearing over and over again, be present, be present, be present. And it dawned on me that every time I was in my present moment thinking, I wish I could change something, it was living in the past. And we know the cliche, don't live in the past, live in the present. And it was like, that's what they're talking about.
Yes.
And so it's kind of about going into the past and finding that gratitude or that positive frame, like you mentioned, that frees us from the shame, the regret, the what could have been. You can't ever change that. What you can do is accept it and figure out how to grow from it. And I kind of get a little hokey. I say, like, figure out how to turn your trauma into a superpower.
I love that. That's a great one. And one of the things I was just thinking about the other morning in this regard, and I'm sorry to take this off, but, when you get in those moments of regret or thinking in the past too much, it's really good to think to yourself, is me dwelling on this serving me right now? And also, is it robbing me of joy of this moment, because because we're taking even more away from ourselves when we go that deep,
And it doesn't feel like we're taking it away. We're like in the moment, we're like, this is what I should be focusing on. And it's just, it's wild when you kind of reach that other side and you're like, wow, I really was manifesting bad circumstances just by focusing on my regret or shame from the past. And I think my story really is an illustration of how much I was letting my past steal my present joy. And then things eventually even happening in the past 8 years that woke me up to like, if I want my life to be good now, I need to stop dwelling on what happened to me when I was 5, when I was 12, when I was 18. Trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you. That's a great quote by Dr. Gabor Mate. And that dawned on me of like, you can never change what happened to you, but you can change the way you feel about what happened to you. And that's been the best journey of my alcohol freedom. I would say it's what gives me so much confidence and joy now is that I've been able to change my perspective of things. But
so take us to the point where you think's a good point that's very relevant to what you're talking about, and tell us a little bit about when things started to change, maybe for the negative and then the positive. And so I'm just going to let you lead it from there.
yeah, so to go back, I really have to start when I was about 4 or 5. My parents were, I would say before age 5, we were a Kodak picture perfect family. My dad was military. My mom was a very gifted special education teacher. She had awards. She had so many beautiful career accolades. She actually put herself through school with my 2 older brothers and then me. My aunt tells a story of how she used to take me to class and getting her master's and all of these things. She was a very driven woman. But by the time I was 5, my dad had been deploying a lot. And this was the age before WhatsApp or FaceTime or cell phones. So they were very disconnected. And my mom, being on her own with 3 young kids, she learned to use alcohol as a coping mechanism. And now as an adult, I can even look back. It wasn't just what was happening in that time, but she had a lot of unprocessed trauma from her childhood. And when I was 5, I just remember this feeling of disconnect from her. She was no longer that warm, nurturing presence. And I didn't have any idea what alcohol was, but I could just tell that she was a different person. It was as if her shell was there, but there was a missing soul, or there was a different entity within her. It almost felt haunting. And when I was about 6 or 7, my middle brother, Eric, he told me, Mom is acting different because she's drinking alcohol. And I said, well, what's alcohol? And he said, well, you've seen that bottle and you know that she's different after she drinks it. She's just sad right now. And at that age, it's very difficult for a child to comprehend that it's not our fault. It's what our parents are going through. So at that age, my brothers and I, we took it as, what are we doing wrong? Why doesn't Mom love us enough? What could we do to make her happy? And these are all very adult feelings and adult responsibilities. And so I grew up very quickly. And I grew up with this conditioned idea from her parents, her father, my grandfather, saying addiction is a disease. It's a genetic disease and it's hereditary. And you have this predisposition, so you really need to watch out. And, learning that at 7 years old, it didn't feel right in my soul. I couldn't explain it, but it just didn't seem right. But over time, going to AA with her and even the Al-Anon groups, this conditioned belief became so ingrained that I truly did believe I could never touch alcohol. Look what it's done to our family. But then there was a turning point when I was 12. I was home alone with my brother, Eric, and at that time, my mom lived with my grandparents. We were all in this house together, multi-generations, but my grandparents were out. My mom at that time lost her teaching job. She was working at Walmart. because of her alcoholism. And Eric and I were home alone when he took his life. He was very much the enabler. He was 2 years older than me, so a little bit more aware of my mom's drinking. And he was definitely her emotional support. And it just weighed on him so much that he made that permanent decision. And me being home alone with him, I was left with a lot of guilt and shame. And there were years that went by afterwards where my mom's drinking was so deep that she would say things to me like, I wish that you were the one that took your life. If I were to lose one child, I wish it would have been you. Why, Eric? What were you doing? Why weren't you with him? And that was the feeling that I created from that trauma. And that was what propelled me after 6, 7 of my very young years saying, I will never touch alcohol. I will never touch alcohol. To then it kind of being a bright idea of, here's my mom. She's able to escape her emotions. Maybe I'll try. And it was the perfect storm of being at the age as well of my peers in high school or middle school, even at that point, being like, hey, let's try drinking. And I remember the first time that I drank, the first words out of my mouth when I felt that warm buzz was, no wonder my mom is an alcoholic. Because it was the first time that I felt this alleviation of those painful internal feelings of regret, remorse, shame, guilt. It was the first time that I was able to think positively and like, oh my gosh, I'm excited about what's going to happen tomorrow and what's going to happen this week at school. And it was this eye-opening experience of like, wow, okay, this is the shit. And it's so sad to think about that that's the environment and that's the programming that I endured, to the point then that once I started drinking and it really became a helpful tool, I thought, well, my mom's an alcoholic. I'm going to be an alcoholic. Look, I'm kind of already that way. These thoughts were happening in high school, early college years. I was getting to the point where I would choose to drink alcohol to numb the pain, even if I had something important to work on, because I would have this hands in the air. What's the point of fighting this urge? Because I'm an alcoholic. And I noticed that narrative being that self-fulfilling prophecy. And the idea that this is a forever issue made me think, why should I even fight it? Why should I even try to fight this? Little did I know that it was just a very clever adaptation to abnormal circumstances. It's not normal to feel those adult responsibilities as a young kid. It's not normal to go through that grief and trauma and then have it be, hey, that's your responsibility. Where were you? What were you doing when Eric did that? That's very abnormal.
Yeah.
But a normal response to that would be a human being searching for comfort, searching for an ease to the pain. And it took me a very long time to figure that out. And I sacrificed a lot. I've got 2 DUIs. I had dropped out of college eventually, putting drinking on the front burner. I kind of convinced myself that I was working and climbing the corporate ladder of the restaurant Hooters, which was very, alcohol fueled service industry lifestyle. And eventually it got to the point after 9 years that my drinking had basically caused me to lose all credibility. They didn't trust me in leadership roles. They didn't trust me to go on openings any longer, open new stores. And I had to eventually step down. And it was these things happening over and over again that led me to be like, okay, this isn't working and I'm becoming my mother. And that was always my biggest fear. It was when I start to really become my mom, that's when I'm going to take this seriously. And at that point, 2 DUIs, losing jobs, not finishing college, I was like, these are the same. This is the track record. And that caused me to start to experiment with some dry Julys, dry January, sober Octobers. But it was always in this venture of like, I'm going to take 30 days off and I'll be cured and I'll be fine and I'll go back to it and it'll all be fine. And then something really, again, significant happened in my life when I was 28. My dad, who had been, my rock through everything, as hurtful and I would say traumatizing as my mom was, my dad was as supportive, and he was the one that really helped me eventually plant the seeds of like the things that dawned on me down the line. When I was 28, he passed away. He was hit in a motorcycle accident. And what we were saying earlier about being stuck in the past, stealing our joy of the now, it dawned on me how many holidays I had with my dad, how many amazing moments that could have been with my dad that I ruined because I was so stuck in my grief of my brother, of my mom. And after he passed away, I had no way to remedy that. I couldn't, again, go back in time and say, I wish I could do Christmas different. I wish I could have not ruined Thanksgiving that year that I was real drunk. And I said, life is fragile. I've already had this many opportunities to see that. I've already seen how quickly somebody can be removed from our life. I never want to feel this again. I never want anybody in my life that's here right now, my husband, my stepmom, my oldest brother, the people that I love, my best friends, if they were to die tomorrow, I don't want anything to be the case of, I wish I wasn't drunk with them the last time I saw them. And that's a big one. And it took about a year to really marinate and fester in there. And then I got so sick of my own BS that I was like, I'm going to try something different. And it's not going to be AA. It's not going to be reading Quit Lit. It's not going to be reading about other people struggling with alcohol. It's going to be this approach with wellness. It's going to be this approach of, if I didn't have this addiction gene that everybody tells me about, which has been disproven, if I didn't have this, then who would I be? And I kind of just fumbled my way through in 2020, focusing on different things that we can get to. But eventually I started to study and say, well, why did this happen? How did I actually change myself? And through my studying, I've learned it's that I started to focus on the present moment. I started to focus on who would I be without alcohol? Who do I want to be? I realized I had always been thinking, who do I not want to be? I'm so sick of being this person. I'm so sick of living like this. Our mind is a magnet and will attract those things into our life. So I needed to start to magnetize. Even if it felt fictitious at the moment, I needed to magnetize. I want to be healthy. I want to be fit. I want to be centered in my own gratitude for life. I want to look at all the good things and feel gratitude for those. I don't want to be living in the past anymore, living in this hurt. And that was really the switch for me. And I compare it to a light switch. I had always felt like there was going to be something that happened in my life where I just didn't want alcohol anymore. And it took the work, but it was that light switch moment for me.
Well, first of all, my heart goes out to you because, I mean, as a little kid and a young adult, you had so many different things that you had to think about, to unfortunately experience. And of course, not knowing how to handle with those, seeking whatever escape you can, that's very understandable. And so first I want to say, my heart goes out to you because I'm a tender guy. But the other thing that comes to mind is that you got to this point. So you had a unique exposure to Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a great organization, but it's not for everyone. And so you had this unique exposure to it throughout much of your life. And yet when you felt in a time that you needed to make a major change and get over your own bullshit, it's not somewhere you saw yourself going. And I'm just curious to know, what drove that? What drove that decision?
It was an awareness that I had always identified since the time that I had started drinking, and even before then, I was afraid of being an alcoholic. Once I started to drink, having that conditioning, hi, I'm Maggie and I'm an alcoholic, it clicked to me that that was an identity. And if that belief in the identity always kept me walking past the bar cart and being like, you shouldn't drink, but you're an alcoholic, so why try to fight it? It clicked to me that that identity wasn't getting me anywhere. And going into rooms, like you said, it's a great organization and it works fantastic wonders for certain people. For me, going into the rooms and talking about alcohol, going into the rooms and kind of counting our days, it dawned on me as an adult that that was giving as much power to alcohol or the absence of. And what I wanted to do was to take that power away and make alcohol irrelevant.
Yes.
I didn't want to drink, but I also didn't want to fear the exposure of alcohol, being around alcohol. And I don't know if this was just my mom's nature or if it was somewhat of this subconscious programming from AA. Probably a mixture of both. But I remember my mom being so afraid of seeing alcohol because she was either going to have to fight this urge with sheer willpower, in which I remember her being just a very hard person to be around. There were times that I was like, when she's sober, she's actually worse than when she's drinking because her entire sober life is, I can't drink, but God damn it, I want to drink. And she was even, I remember sometimes when she was drinking, she was nicer. Like she was nicer than that person.
Mm-hmm.
And this is probably my own perspective, but I didn't want my sobriety to be basically worshiping, I abstain and I stay away from alcohol. I don't go places with alcohol or else I'm going to cave. I didn't want that belief. And I didn't want what I had seen my mom experience of either caving in every time she saw it because she was constantly talking about it with her AA group. She was constantly focusing on it as the problem. And I didn't want to fear it. There's a lot of my, I guess I would say, controversial thoughts around AA. But I think that there's just certain types of people that it doesn't work for. There's people that I talk to all the time that say as soon as they walk out of a room, they want to go get a drink. And I think there's a psychology process behind that of what we focus on and what we give energy to grows. And I remember so many times my mom leaving AA and she would just stop by the liquor store and it'd be one of her worst drinking episodes. And I felt that same way.
Yeah. Yeah, the mind's going to want to rebel or what you focus on. I totally am not surprised by that. So give me an idea about, I want to talk about how you're working with people and some of your philosophies and strategies, but give me an idea about where you were with your drinking, with the actual amount and frequency and where you are today.
Well, on a normal week, this sounds crazy. A normal week would be at least 60 units. And I was a hard alcohol fan. I wanted to get the job done. I loved shots, and I would have a shot with a double drink at the same time. During heavy drinking weeks, it would be upwards of 100 units. I drank fast and I didn't throw up. So I thought I literally had this thought of, I have an alcoholic liver. It can take anything. Like, I'm my mom's child. So again, these thoughts drove even my behavior in my drinking moments.
Yeah.
So I thought I was a pro and I took a lot of pride in it in a very strange way as I look back. But I remember
Some of that is just youth too, like it's a mixture of background and youth. Cause I definitely I was a stupid frat guy. I'd say stupid things like that too, and we're also trained by movies and all these other things to think that if we can conquer it, or not apply to the rules of like getting drunk, throwing up, or being hungover, we're somehow for men more masculine, or so whatever it is. I mean, I don't think that's too uncommon, I guess, as I'm relating to you in that way.
Yeah, and when we're young, the hangovers just don't sit in. Like, it's just not as bad.
Yeah.
But, I mean, they got bad. But I definitely, used my party identity to make friends and have all of these different relationships. And it was a way that I could find that I attracted people into my life, was I could buy them shots. So it wasn't abnormal for me to drink hard alcohol in high amounts every day of the week. Now, where I'm at is I can decide to have a lapse in sobriety, and I stop at 2, 3 if I'm getting crazy, because I remember the depression and the anxiety afterwards. I remember how lethargic I'll be. I remember how I'll just not feel like doing anything the next day. As I reintroduced alcohol into my life, I realized I don't want it the same way, but I am finally able to control it. It's no longer, once I have one, I have to have 20. It's no longer, I drink to get drunk. It's, one is satisfying. One is nice to have on my anniversary with my husband. That kind of approach was what really helped me break this conditioning of, you're an alcoholic. Once you have one, you're going to have a bunch. You're going to have 1,000, the old adage. So I really wanted to dispel that myth. And I remember reintroducing alcohol, being around my husband and saying, if the disease model is true, as soon as I have this one, I'm going to spin into being a raging alcoholic again. And he said, you've been doing all these healthy things. That's not who you are anymore. I had that one. And I said, it's all right. And I came home and took off my makeup and went to bed,
Yeah. I remember taking a break for quite a while and being like, this is it, when I was, because, like, to give you a little reference, like, my goal was never drink again. My goal was to no longer drink every single night in the week, wine every single night. And once I stopped doing that, part of that included taking a long break. But when I did, I was like, what did I miss so much about this one little thing? So it had lost its appeal, and it sounds like it did the same for you.
Yes. Yeah. And whatever you kind of did in that time off, it worked, because I'm sure, or maybe I'm at left field here, but I know that I had taken time off in the past, but it was kind of under this guise of, I'm counting down to when I can drink again, and I'm not going to change how I drink. I'm just going to be better at it somehow. Whereas when I finally put my foot down and I said, no, I'm not going to drink until I figure my shit out. I'm not going to drink again until I create a new identity and have new interests and hobbies and things to look forward to, so that alcohol just doesn't feel the same. It wasn't until then that, like, I was able to really say, like you mentioned, like, what's the big deal about this stuff? Like, this isn't actually that fun. But it's not just time that heals all. It's what you do with that time. Because I had spent those months before trying, just counting down the days, not doing anything except for removing alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in my transformation, yes, I removed alcohol, but I wasn't focusing on the absence of alcohol. I was focusing on, what do I add in? What do I love? What are the things that have been kind of on the back burner, my dreams, my hopes, my aspirations, that every time I thought about them in the past, I would say, yeah, but that would take away from drinking time, or that would be too expensive. I can't afford that because all my money is going to alcohol. I finally gave myself permission to dabble in those things.
Isn't it interesting that you start to make plans around alcohol, but when you remove that, you start to make plans around things that you really want to do? If you're proactive, you can, like you said, if you just remove it. But it is so funny, you don't realize how many of your plans are made around alcohol. This podcast is brought to you by Sunnyside, the #1 alcohol moderation platform. And if you could benefit from drinking a bit less, head on over to sunnyside.co to get a free 15-day trial.